Hey students, we're here at our Environmental Interpretive Center, which is just a bright spot on this campus. When you get your own classroom, if you're in the metro area, you got to check out their free programs. They have pond studies, they have maple syruping, they have hiking. They also have an actual experiment where your students come here for 3 hours, explore the natural areas. The next 3 hours, they design an experiment and carry it out. And the next 3 hours, they come and they present their experiments. It is a very excellent program, all free. So if you are teaching in this area, make sure you look into all their free programs. It is such a great resource. We have over 300 acres here of natural area that has been preserved, and it's just a gem. In the middle of this concrete area, we have this beautiful, beautiful natural area where lots and lots is going on. Now you can see our rain garden in the front. When I started working here at U of M, this was just grass. And when they built the EIC, it was also just grass. Then someone had the idea, why don't we demonstrate what a rain garden is? And so this rain garden was put in. If you have a wet area in your yard, you can put in a rain garden. In fact, if you live in Dearborn, the city will give you a $1,200 grant and help you to put it in. And even in Detroit, other cities in the area, they all want you to have rain gardens because rain gardens do 3 things. They slow, spread, and soak rainwater in. The worst thing that happens when it rains in an area that has as much pavement, as much impervious surfaces, roofs, pavement, garages, houses, water, when it hits the ground on an impervious surface, it goes right into these storm sewers here. And these storm sewers go right to the river, exactly to the river. And so what we have is around here, because there's so many impervious surfaces, we have very flashy rivers. A flashy river is a river that when it rains, instead of the water soaking into the ground slowly and possibly some of it running off and getting to the river, it all just rushes into the storm sewer, rushes to the river, and the river floods. And so this impervious problem we have here, our rivers can never be 100% healthy because once you've paved over 10% of a watershed, an area where water drains into a specific river or lake or ocean, once that is paved over a certain percent, you really don't have a shot at having a super healthy river. The rivers in the UP, very healthy. There's very little impervious surface. When it rains in the UP, the water just hits dirt, grass, soil, beaches, and it soaks in slowly. When it rains here, you can see we have so much pavement, it hits the pavement, rushes into a storm sewer, goes right to the river, causes flooding. So that's a big problem. It's such a big problem that a while ago, I don't even know, maybe 50 years ago, the Army Corps of Engineers over on Rotunda Drive made a cement river. If you drive down Rotunda Drive over the Rouge River, you'll see that both banks are completely cement. Instead of having a natural river, which we will visit soon, the Rouge River, where the river can meander, where the river can flow naturally, we have a cement chute over by Rotunda Drive. And Dr. Gelderloos, one of our great professors here, was here over 50 years before he retired. He told them when they started thinking about this idea, because they thought it would prevent flooding, he said, not a good idea. And now we all realize it wasn't a good idea, and it's going to cost billions of dollars to take all that cement out. So we'll probably be stuck with a cement river for a long time. Again, that was to control flooding. But the way we can naturally control flooding is with rain gardens, which these are all native plants. These are plants native to Michigan. They evolved here. They have the exact right depth of roots so that they can handle our summers without getting watered. Have any of you ever gotten New Guinea impatiens flowers from the farm market? They're beautiful flowers, but they're from New Guinea. They're from a tropical forest. If you don't water them every single day, they're going to wilt immediately. These plants here do not get watered. They're native to this area. They evolved here. They evolved with our rainfall here. They evolved with all of our weather here. They have very deep roots. This rain garden is able to mitigate the water that is caused from our roof, which is impervious. We made this center. We took up ground that used to allow water to just soak in, but now we have this huge roof, and what we have is a rain garden to help us slow, spread, and soak the water in. We don't want water rushing to our rivers. Another thing about our storm sewers is throughout the year, lots and lots of things end up on our roads. Have you ever seen the cars at Greenfield Village, the old cars? They're leaking oil all over the place. There's big oil slicks everywhere. When it rains, that oil goes right into the storm sewer, right into the river. In the summertime, or in the wintertime, when we put salt on the roads, that salt goes right into our storm sewers. In fact, in this very area, we have some salt marsh plants that have somehow taken root here from all the salt that we get from wintertime salting the roads. If you have a transmission link, a radiator link, when I was a kid, after we would clean the floors and things with bleach, we'd just go right to the storm sewer, dump it in. In fact, when people changed their oil, back in the good old days, when people changed their oil, they would go right to the storm sewer and dump it in. We used to use our rivers for just a dumping ground. In the 50s, several rivers actually caught fire. They actually were so full of oil and solvents that they were actually burning. So we've done a really good job so far cleaning things up, but we've got a long way to go. And this rain garden and this area is just a prime example of what you can do. If you think of just a grass lawn, would it support many insects? Would it support many birds? No. This rain garden, you can hear all the life that's in it. And if you walked into it, you would see all kinds of flies and bees and different flying insects enjoying all the native plants here. So hopefully you can think about putting a rain garden in at your house and helping. We don't want water rushing into the river. We want to slow it down, we want it to spread out, and we want it to soak in. That is how to keep a watershed healthy. Okay, so this is the Rouge River watershed. What that means is that any rain that falls in this area that doesn't end up in the storm sewer, which a lot of it will end up in the storm sewer, if it washes away, it's going to end up in the Rouge River. You can think of a watershed as kind of a bowl, okay? So around our bowl, we have things like Bloomfield Hills and Rochester Hills and Farmington Hills. We have a hilly area, and that's why in this area the water eventually comes downriver, down to the Rouge River, which will then empty into the next body of water. So our watershed here, we're really, really trying. The Environmental Interpretive Center, Dr. Gelderloos, Friends of the Rouge, Friends of the Detroit River, all of these groups are trying to bring our watershed back. We have a goal in this area to make our Rouge River, once again, recreational, so that people could go in a kayak or a canoe and feel safe. Back in the day, this was not recreational. If you fell into the water, you could risk very severe infections, especially if you had a cut or you had some kind of way that the water could get into your bloodstream. We're trying to bring this river back to recreational. It's never going to be like a UP river. There's too much pavement in this area for that to happen. But at this point, we're really working hard to get it recreational. We have the storm sewer here that I talked about, and now we're going to talk a little bit about another kind of sewer that we have here. And this sewer takes our waste from our toilets to a sewage treatment plant or a water treatment plant to be treated and then sent back out into the river. So the sewage sewers are different than the storm sewers. Now in this area we have a very unique problem, and it's a problem for most older cities. When the storm sewers and the sewers with sewage were built, they were built in such a way that when we have a huge rain event, let's say 2 inches of rain in an hour, or we have a huge downpour, what happens is the storm water and the sewer water combined. It's called a combined sewer overflow, and that has been a huge issue for our river. I have been past this river on days where it just smells like a sewer because there was a huge rain event. The sewage, which is supposed to go to a treatment plant, which is full of waste from our toilets, and the storm water mix and get put right back in the river untreated. That is a human health hazard. So in the 80s, a federal judge ordered this area to start correcting that. And if you live in Dearborn, you have definitely experienced some of this construction of the new sewer tunnels that were mandated by a federal judge in order to clean up the waterway, because this really is a human health hazard when sewage and stormwater mix. It's just unhealthy for everyone. Our sewage is brought to a treatment plant where it undergoes lots and lots of different treatments in order to make it able to get back into the river. They're trying to separate this sewer pipes from the storm pipes. We don't want storm water, which is basically unpolluted except for a little bit of oil and things that it picks up from the pavement, mixing with our sewage. So we're trying to separate those so that our river can be healthier. Because again, right now the river many times in summer will smell really bad because the sewer and the storm water mix together. Now, the way that we are helping to correct that, they're building huge retention basins along the Rouge River. That's one solution that we have found, and that's one of your questions. So retention basins are one solution to this issue. Another solution to trying to make our river healthier is also planting native plants. Planting native plants so we can slow the spread. Now, another question on your paper is about Native American trails. And the Native Americans would build their roads on high ground. Native Americans would never build Hines Drive. Why? Hines Drive is closed very often because it's built on what we call a floodplain. Later on, we're going to actually see a natural floodplain. So the Native Americans would build their roads on high ground, like Fairlane Drive that we're standing on. This is high ground. This would be a nice trail because the Native Americans understood that if you build on a floodplain, you're going to have problems. All right, so here we are at the Fairlane Lake. Some people call it Hidden Lake. This is a man-made lake. Henry Ford himself had it dug. This was his backyard, and he had a lot of things put in because he loved birds, and he knew birds want water. So when you're Henry Ford, you could just dig a huge lake in your backyard so the birds can have water. In this lake are lots and lots, there's like 10 different species of turtles, and there's all kinds of fish. And the major fish that's in here are the goldfish that people got from a carnival or got from here or there and got tired of them, so they threw them in. If you come here on certain days, you can see a big orange mass moving through the water. That's the goldfish. But this is a good visual representation of a watershed. Our lesson today is called a trip of the drip. In other words, when a drop of water falls from the sky, what are some places it can end up? And so some places it can end up is like in the rain garden, where it will slow soak and spread, naturally soaking into the ground. That's perfect. Some of that water is going to go in the storm sewer, go right out to the river, maybe even cause flooding if it's a big rain. And some of that water is going to be what we call runoff. And it's going to run off into a low area. And if you can see, this is kind of like a bowl. This is kind of like a bowl, just like our watershed is kind of a bowl. Our Rouge River watershed, remember I said Farmington Hills and Bloomfield Hills and Rochester Hills are all on the edges of our watershed. That makes the water eventually go into the Rouge River. Okay? Now, this is a man-made lake, but it does have an opening which leads to a little stream which leads to the Rouge River. And because it's a man-made lake, we haven't worried too much that the main fish in here is goldfish, which are not native fish. Okay, we would expect in this area to have sunfish, bluegills, catfish, and these kind of fish. But mostly this is goldfish. The turtles don't mind the goldfish. And so a decision was made, we're not going to worry about the goldfish. It's good protein. The turtles love it. The native turtles will eat the goldfish, so we're good with that. But just look at this lake and think about all the different life that it can support. We have over 325 species of birds migrate through this area. In the spring, they're heading north. In the fall, they're heading south. This lake provides food, it provides water, it provides lots and lots of things for these migratory birds. This 300-acre area that we have, even though it has a man-made lake, even though Henry Ford's mansion is kind of looking out, you could almost see it beyond these trees, it's still a very important stopover site for birds that are migrating. We had a full-time researcher here at the Rouge River Bird Observatory who has just stunning research showing that this area itself is highly effective in fattening up birds that are on their way north or south. So this area here, like I said, even though it's a man-made lake, and Henry Ford put alder trees around, this is a type of tree that fixes nitrogen. This is a type of tree that actually has bacteria on its nodules that produce nitrogen for the soil, so produce fertilizer for other things to grow in. It's a very significant part of our natural areas. We have a marsh back here, we have this lake, and we're heading to the Rouge River because, again, we're in the Rouge River watershed. And the elevation overall is leading us to that river, which is beyond us over to my left side. Eventually, we will get to the Rouge River. But as we go, the elevation is just taking. So if we were a drop of water and we found a nice area to run off into, we might actually end up in the Rouge River. Okay? Most in this area, because there isn't pavement, will end up soaking into the ground. But some of the water eventually will run off naturally into the river. Some will infiltrate into the ground. The trip of the drip is kind of a little story about the water cycle, in case you haven't caught on to that yet. So we're actually seeing the water cycle in real life. If you can look at this lake, evaporation will take place. Some of the water droplets will evaporate back into the sky, possibly condense into clouds, or just be water vapor that's in the sky. I know there's water vapor in this area because I've got some condensation actually on my glasses right now. So water can take many, many paths when it falls to the ground. This is just one of them. All right, here we are at the actual Rouge River. I said we're in the Rouge River watershed, which means that all the runoff and the stormwater in this area will come to the Rouge River eventually. Now, the water that slows, soaks, and spreads, that water will be in the ground. But any runoff, water that doesn't sink into the ground or gets in a storm sewer, will end up here. In this area, we have other watersheds. We have the Huron River watershed. We have the Baby Creek watershed. And also, we can go bigger and say, this is the Lake Erie watershed, which now we take it to the next level. This is also in the Atlantic Ocean watershed. So this watershed, we're talking about the local river. Our Rouge River empties into the Detroit River. The Detroit River leads to Lake Erie. Lake Erie leads to Lake Ontario, which goes to the St. Lawrence Seaway and then to the Atlantic Ocean. So on a larger scale, we're in the Atlantic Ocean watershed. There's something called the Continental Divide in the middle of our country, where if you're on the other side of the Continental Divide, that water is part of the Pacific Ocean watershed. But here we're talking about a local watershed, the Rouge River. And if you look at the river, you can see right now the water's not flowing very fast. We haven't had rain for a few days. If we had a huge rain event, the water would be rushing by. And that's another very good point about when you are in the classroom. If you had planned some kind of trip, a canoe trip or a water trip, and there was a big rain right before it, you probably would want to cancel that. Because a river after a big rain is a very dangerous place. There's dangerous currents. So you would want to watch the weather if you are planning any kind of water event with your students. All right, now looking at this river, if you fell in right here, which side would you rather jump out on? The opposite side or this side? We are on what's called a meander. A meander is just a curve in the river. And at every meander, we get erosion and we get deposition. And the deposition side is going to be the flatter side, which would be over there. The erosion side is the outer curve. The erosion side is the outer curve. And so that would be this side here. This is a very steep. So you would never want to build your house on the side of the river where erosion takes place. If you were going to build a house on a river, you'd want to build it on the deposition side. So we have two processes taking place here, erosion and deposition. And the reason is because of friction, because the water on the outer bend is going much faster. It's like if you've ever played crack the whip. The person on the outer part of the whip gets thrown faster than the person on the inner side. And you'll have a little bit in there, in your streams lesson, you'll have a little bit about that. So, steep on this side, more flat on that side because of erosion and deposition, which happens at every meander or every turn in a river. And a middle-aged river like the Rouge River has lots of meanders. All right, here we are on this very flat part of the Trip of the Drip. This is actually called a floodplain. When the Rouge River floods, it will cover this entire area with water. That is what a floodplain is. It's an area that is flooded when the river floods. And Hines Drive is the perfect example of another floodplain. But there's a road on Hines Drive. So again, when that floods, we've got problems. But look at this beautiful area, this old growth forest, but this beautiful flat area. Interesting research was just done by Dr. Gelderlos and Griffin Bray, where they discovered that in times of flood, they just thought that the water would come from the river and soak down. But they've actually shown by taking core samples that some water bubbles up from the ground. It was really, really interesting research. But anyways, the flat part of the Trip of the Drip is called a floodplain. On the edges of a floodplain will be little levees, natural levees. If you live in Dearborn and go to Ford Field Park, those hills are natural levees. They form when the floodplain, when it floods, and then it gets to a certain area, there's little hills develop and you've got the levees.